everyone. Welcome to the morning show. We're coming to you today on WJOPLP Newburyport at FM 96.3 on Channel 9 and on Newburyport Community Media's YouTube channel at ncmhub.org. I'm your host, Mary Jacobsen, and today I'm happy to welcome Bert Snow here. He's coordinator of the Sculpture at Maudsley show. He's also himself an artist who works on conceptually based and kinetic works in a variety of different mediums. So first of all, Bert, welcome to the show, and thank you so much for taking time to come here.
Well, thanks. It's great to be here.
Well, I'm happy to talk about the Outdoor Sculpture show because I enjoy it every year. I walk at Maudsley a lot, and as we were talking about just before we started the show, it's always gorgeous and inspiring because of the beautiful nature at Maudsley, but I'm always really happy when it's Outdoor Sculpture show time because it just adds a kind of a festive quality to my nature walks. I take different routes at different times, and I never know what I'm going to see on each of the different routes. So I'm happy to have you here talking about the Outdoor Sculpture show, which is in its 25th year. Mm-hmm. And first of all, congratulations, Bert, on that. And I was hoping you could share the origin story of the show with us and how long have you been involved?
Sure. Well, first of all, it's just really nice to hear you saying you look forward to it and that you find it surprising. I think that's something that we pride ourselves on, and we're happy about that aspect of the show. So the show actually started as a sculpture trail at Old Town Hill in Newbury as part of the Parker River Festival, which was a short-lived festival in 1990, started in 1996, 97. And so in 1996, artists Caroline Bagenal and Nina Tanis, who are both still involved in the show, and actually both are artists in the show this year, they started that sculpture walk, and there were probably about 10 artists that were in it, not including me. I had moved to Newburyport in the winter of 1995, so I knew them, and I saw the show.
Yeah.
The next year when they did it, also at Old Town Hill, I was in it. The trustees of reservations then said, "We like having your sculpture trail here, but we really think that we should be sure that the themes of it are always environmental." And I think Nina and Caroline said, telling artists what to do is generally not a good idea. It just isn't really the way it works.
Free spirits.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So they sort of thought about, well, where else could we do the show? And Nina Tanis approached the park and spoke with the park director, Rob Kovacs, who I want to talk a little bit about later. He just retired this year. And he said, yes, let's give it a shot. So in 1998, in the spring of 1998, we did the first show at Maudsley State Park, probably maybe 15 artists, something like that. It was purely artists calling artists who were friends and saying, hey, do you want to come do this? And we just made it all happen ourselves and made a little catalog. And a lot of what started then is still kind of part of the way the show works now.
Well, wonderful. So it was really artist initiated from the very beginning.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And, well, and Maeve, could you bring up the poster for the show while we talk a little bit about its history? So how has it changed over time? Because it's been around now for 25 years, Bert. And is it pretty much the same but just gotten larger? Or have there been shifts in how the artists have conceived of the purpose and the function of the show?
Right. Well, after that first show, Nina Tanis moved to Ireland and said, Bert, I think you'd be good at running the show. And when I was teasing her about that, she said, well, you said yes.
So it's all on you, Bert.
Yeah, and I think at that point, if anybody had thought that we'd still be doing it in 25 years, we would have thought that was wonderful. I think that in the real heart of the show has stayed the same. But we've had to kind of understand for ourselves what that meant. Like when it was just us calling our friends and saying, hey, you should be in the show, then that was very organic.
Yeah.
But we realized that, we realized that as people would say things to us like, this show would be more prestigious if you juried it, that really struck us the wrong way. And that in addition to just sort of, we didn't want it to be just our friends, we wanted it to be more open.
Yeah.
And so we really came to the conclusion that we weren't going to jury it, that it was going to be open in spirit. And that really has, I think, been one of the strengths of the show all the way through. It's interesting, I think about this, and I think about it when I go to other shows as well, because our ethos really is, if you have a crazy idea for a sculpture you want to build, you should do it. And you can apply to be in the show, and we'll do our best to help you if it isn't something that you've done before. Like you, Mary, walk in the park, enjoy the sculpture show. You may come out of this interview thinking, I have had these ideas. And we've also never been in the business of saying no to artists. No, your work isn't good enough, right?
Yeah.
And now, these years later, we can see we have a tremendous community, right? Artists, we're all friends. The community changes and grows over time. Artists come in, artists move away, young artists come in, artists get busy and come back 10 years later and join the show again. We have some artists in this year. I'm thinking of Sue Blim, who was in the early years and is back. Or Nina, moved back from Ireland and is in the show again this year, Nina Tanis.
Okay.
So I think that's really sort of the most important. I think some of the changes have been, the first year we were spread out all over the park, and we had some trouble with vandalism, and it was just hard for us to sort of keep track of everything. So
it's a big park,
right, and so we agreed to kind of narrow the area down. We also needed to clarify that we were going to be careful about not hurting the park, right? About the environmental impact of the work.
Sure.
In the early years, an artist drove an old car into the park and cut it in half and put the two halves of the car facing up. True story. And leaked a fair bit of motor oil.
Oh dear. Okay.
That was probably the poster child for
what not to do.
What not to do. But so artists all understand that now.
Yeah. Okay.
We now have a well-developed kind of application process. And we have, up to 50 artists, so we're a lot bigger.
Yeah.
And that's just grown organically. It kind of, just slowly up and up and up. And we've actually capped it at 50 now.
Yeah. Well, so it's an expanding community, and one of the ways, and it clearly a creativity incubator, so to speak, Bert. And one of the things that you also do that I think is really interesting, it's not limited to people who identify as an artist in the past. It's open to people who are members of the community who come up with an idea for something they'd like to do. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how diverse your sculptors are.
Right. Well, one of my favorite stories is in the early years, a 10-year-old artist named Sarah Fix did a piece for the show with her father, Joe, and they did a beautiful piece together. And I think they may have done 2 pieces together, but then she was 12. She booted her dad. I don't need you, Dad. I'm doing my own thing, right? And so Joe Fix decided to do a piece on his own. And those of you who know the show will be familiar with that name because he is a brilliant sculptor, and he has now shown his sculptures all over New England. and he continues to do the Maudsley show, and he does beautiful conceptual work. By day, he's a structural engineer.
Okay.
You know, so would he have called himself an artist? Maybe not, but now he is one, right?
Yeah.
And so I feel like our culture does a pretty good job of telling most of us that we're not creative.
Yeah.
We're finding ways for us
Yeah.
to tell ourselves that.
Yeah.
You know, if you can't draw, you're not creative, as if drawing, I would say, to me, drawing doesn't have a lot to do with it. And I think we all are creative. And so we really aim to be more encouraging that way. In terms of what that's meant for who's been in the show, well, from 10 to artists in their 90s, families. We aim to draw from all of the communities around the Merrimack Valley area. So we're not really intended to be a show for an artist coming out of the museum school.
Right.
Now, if that was an artist coming out of the museum school who grew up in Newburyport and had a particular connection, sure.
Yeah.
Right. I feel like we've had artists from a lot of different backgrounds. We did find, working with our youngest artists, is what we're really looking for there is, you might be 10, but are you considering yourself an artist in doing this sculpture, and are you taking it seriously?
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And pretty much, if you're going to put in an application, you're probably there.
Yes, right. You've had an idea, you've given thought, and you have to express it to people about what you really want to do.
Right. Right.
Well, I think that's a real strength of the show. Part of the festive quality of it is that it's not juried, and people who are committed to an idea of their own, an artistic expression of themselves, can come and put it out there for people to enjoy in certainly a non-traditional setting. And that's what I wanted to ask you about next, Bert, because it strikes me that there must be challenges and also some benefits of putting your artwork together outside, where it is vulnerable to the elements. So what are some of the challenges and what are some of the benefits from a sculptor's point of view about having your artwork outdoors?
Right. Well, the biggest challenge is scale. Right. If you put something, you're building something in a room, or you put it in a gallery, and you make something that's 7 feet tall or 6 feet wide, it feels huge. But when you're outside under the infinite height of the sky,
Right.
scale really changes.
Yeah.
And the site is intended to be site-specific, which means that we ask the artist to go choose a site.
Oh,
Right?
I didn't
Choose a
know.
particular
Interesting.
place in the park themselves.
Yeah.
And then often to build something that is built to be there.
Yeah.
Right? So some artists are just picking a spot out in a field where it's pretty neutral. Others are hiding things in among the trees, right? So actually, Maeve, if you want to bring up a photo of a sculpture, Carolina Galvarez Alvarado,
Okay.
she was in but just been in the show a few years. She has a piece that is, it's like a small marionette doll, and it's in this little kind of copse of trees in the field. It's a site that no other artist has ever spotted.
Interesting.
But it's just in this little group of trees, and there's a little space inside that if you kind of walk carefully in, and that's where her sculpture is. And it's probably 3 feet high and then suspended like a marionette. But when you get in close to it, it's beautiful, right? And it's protected, and you can tell she was thinking about that. If you put that out in the middle of the field, it would get lost.
Right, it would lose the impact of
Right,
the
so
contrasting.
That's a big one.
Yeah.
The second is just the elements, right?
Yeah.
It's been beautiful and sunny this year.
It has been.
other years we've had major northeasterns and storms, and sculptures have been destroyed. And so we try to kind of coach artists on materials.
Okay.
Here's one for all of our listeners. Outdoors, paper mache is never a good idea.
You don't want something that will melt under the rain.
Right, and you can varnish paper mache as much as you want. There are artists who have done successful things making something that's sort of like paper mache, but they're using like very waterproof glues.
Okay, yeah.
But in my work, I work with these last few years with kind of foraged wood, branches and trees that are blown down, which I then strip bark from. And often things are suspended and moving. And so I'm very careful with the rope I use. I use rope that's used in sailboats that is designed to absolutely not stretch. Because it's important to me that when I get something all balanced a certain way, that it's not going to be 3 inches lower tomorrow.
Right, that's right. So it'll be stable and consistent. Interesting. Yeah. So you adapt to the elements.
Right.
And a lot of times with the materials.
Right.
And also it's really interesting what you say about the scale.
Right.
Because when you have the scale of nature,
yes,
it's different from any gallery room, no matter how large the gallery. So go ahead,
right.
Bert.
Well, so Maeve, another interesting piece, Lily Gabory's piece, it's actually a kind of printing called cyanotype, where you're exposing, she's treating a large piece of cloth with chemicals that she then exposes to light to come up with something that's sort of like an old photograph, but it's new. And so she has made this piece it's kind of like a big sail, and it involves ships, and she grew up in Newburyport and is sort of thinking about ships and the history, and it's a very kind of ghostly image of a ship in a place where there certainly are a lot of shipwrecks. But she put that down by the river, not thinking about how much stronger the wind is there than it would be if she'd put it around a corner with trees to defend it.
Shelter, yeah.
And so she thought she was going to might have to move her piece, but then she found ways to reinforce it. So, a young artist who hasn't primarily worked outdoors, she's getting her education. Right?
There's a learning curve.
Exactly. Yes.
Well, I'm curious, Bert. What do you hear from the artists about what they value about their participation in the show, and what do you hear from people like myself, people who are regular viewers? Right.
I think that one of the things that artists say is that the show feels like a place where they can take chances.
Oh, yeah. That makes perfect sense.
Because that's part of our ethos.
Yeah.
It's a place where you can say, I have an idea and I'm going to see where it goes. I might do something that isn't in a style that I've already established. I might try something completely new, right? If it's a show where I can come in as not somebody who even thinks of myself as an artist, then there's that freedom. And I think it makes it fun, right, for us artists. To work on something where you kind of feel like the pressure's off a little bit.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing is, you might think that would mean that the quality of the show, the quality of the work might be lower. But it really hasn't proven to be the case. I think because artists are taking chances, sometimes things don't work out. And that's okay.
Yeah.
I think but it's the percentage, if you walk around the show, is really high, and then there are the things where somebody just had an idea and went with it and just came up with something incredible that even surprises themselves.
Interesting. Yeah. That's really interesting that it's an opportunity then from the artist's point of view to really push your boundaries outward.
Right.
And in an environment that is very festive and very non-traditional, that you can expand your own ideas and try something different that may not be traditional for everyone, or it may not be traditional for you and what you usually do, to good effect. Again, the idea of this creativity incubator keeps coming back to me, and how the outdoor sculpture serves that purpose, which is exciting. And the whole community is involved in that endeavor then,
Right.
because Maudsley is a public park, and all kinds of different people go through there at all different hours of the day. So
Right, right. And that's another piece of it. As an artist, you're getting to, the sites that you get to look at and choose for your sculpture are gorgeous.
Yes.
And thousands of people come through and
Right.
see the show every year. I mean, literally thousands. So,
And they're not people who would necessarily be going to see sculpture
Right.
in a gallery, either public or private gallery. So
Right.
it's also an audience expander for art and artists, which is a good thing.
right, right.
Well, Bert, are there other pieces from this word show that are particularly unusual, thought-provoking, or that use different kinds of materials that you'd like to highlight?
Sure. We've looked at a few of them. Let's start with Nancy Sanders' piece.
Okay.
It's called Howl. So Nancy is a show that's been involved from the very beginning. And her background is as a puppeteer.
Oh,
And so she is a master of fabric. And, in this piece, she's working with nylon and sort of rings. And it's a piece where she's just, she's thinking of the thread of conversation with each other. And it's sort of it's a structure that you could howl through from one end to the other with a great sense of humor. And you can see sort of her background and her humor in her work, and it's something that's always there. And so that's, I think, also, her work, I feel like, always has a lot for children.
oh,
Right?
okay.
I don't think she's necessarily trying that, but just her good spirit and her sense of humor means that that's part of what happens. Another Nancy, Nancy Winkler, who's been doing the show for a few years, has a beautiful piece that she's exploring and thinking about mushrooms and the threads that mushrooms throw down. And her piece is suspended. So it's like there's an area of ground, and on top of the ground there are beautiful kind of constructed mushrooms that she's made, and then there are just beautiful threads coming down that almost
Like
reach
filaments.
the actual ground.
Yeah.
But it's, the fact that it's just suspended in air as it is gives it a really magical quality. And
Yeah, it looks like a floating island, like
Yeah.
Middle Earth,
yeah,
so to speak.
yeah, and that I just feel like that is really beautiful. There are a lot of really gorgeous trees in the area of the park where we do our shows, and so there are often sculptures that are suspended. I myself, only in the past few years have I been doing anything that's like standing on the ground, but so it's interesting to see how artists work with suspending things, whether it's just a way to have something up. We could look at Rochelle Perry-Platine's Our Common. So she's really working with scale in this piece, right? It's a giant hoop for needlepoint.
Yeah.
But of course, where the needle would be giant and the thread would be giant. So she has made these things out of scale in a way that I think really she's beautifully pulled it off, right? So you see it, you think, you're not thinking about how did she do it, right? You're just like, there's a giant
Spool. Yeah.
spool.
Yeah. And we should add that the theme of this year's sculptor exhibit is thread,
Yes.
which the artists themselves chose. And so, as you've been describing the different works, they all have that element. You mentioned rope before, and thread, and the filaments hanging down from the Middle Earth, as I
Right.
call it.
Right.
So,
Right. Our themes, for the first few years, we didn't have themes, and we really came up with the idea of doing that mainly to give ourselves a way to talk about the show year to year, right? So that we weren't just saying, it's another year, we're making more sculptures. And given that, one of the important things that we say to the artists is, you're free to work with the theme, or not work with the theme, or work, counter to the theme, right? It's up to you, right? We're not saying all sculptures must conform to the theme. This year, I think a lot of artists have taken inspiration from the theme in a very interesting way. And last year's theme was very different. Last year's theme was fracture. And that also was really interesting in terms of what the artists did with it. This year, I realized that the word in the theme is also a material, right?
Yes,
Thread is a physical material. And so that, that's one way in which artists could think about the theme. But it's also a verb, right?
Yes,
you can
it is.
thread
As in thread
something.
a needle. Yeah.
And it's also, as a word for a thread, it gets used metaphorically in a lot of ways, right?
Yes, it does. Yeah.
We talk about, even email threads. I don't think anybody did that with the sculpture, but it's just, connect something
Connecting,
that connects things. So it's been interesting to see. Maybe another piece to pull up would be the Kirby's piece. So this is a piece by a family, Gretchen, Kava, and Tavish Kirby. This family started doing the show more than 5, less than 10 years ago, I think. 3 kids with some serious health challenges, and their mother, Gretchen, who, because of their health challenges, were homeschooling. And they, it was just something that they decided to do. This is the first year that they've let Gretchen, their mother, join the team. But they, they've enthusiastically joined the community. They, come on calls with us and talk about what they've been doing. They kind of get together and work, collaboratively to come up with what they're doing. Their piece this year is actually about their family, and it's a series of kind of abstract wooden figures that represent different members of the family, and then they've sort of threaded them all together in ways that, what's interesting to me is you look at it and you can just think, oh, there's just lots of threads connecting these things. But then I realized, well, they were actually thinking about this, right? They weren't just randomly stringing things together. They're like, well, here's this thread in this color that means something to us about how these 2 people in the family connect. And of course, they're not telling us what that is, and they don't need to, but
but they're showing.
Right.
Yeah. Well, that sounds amazing, Bert. We do have, I think, a photo of your own piece, and perhaps it would be interesting maybe if you could bring up Bert Snow's piece. And could you talk a little bit about how you put it together?
Sure. What I've been saying about this one is it's one that took on a life of its own. I started out thinking about a bridge and maybe a ramp off of a bridge, and I was going to do something where, 2 arches of stripped branches that, with maybe the branches mean there's be one sort of ramp coming off, and then I would use rope to connect them to sort of create this simple bridge. I went looking for the wood that I would use, and I walk in the woods and I look for branches or trees that have come down, and that's what I work with. And somebody asked me, do you worry about being able to find wood to work with? And I think, no, I don't. And the next time you're walking in the woods, just start noticing all the dead branches and trees that are dead that are still standing.
Yeah.
Plenty. There's plenty of them.
Nature supplies.
Right. But I came across these 2 I later learned it's a gray willow, big branches that had come down at the Indian Hill Reservoir, and I thought, I'm gonna take these away before the town comes and chips them up.
Yeah.
And they were more complex and interesting. And so I said, okay, so there's going to be more things coming off.
Yeah.
And ideas I had about it sort of coming out of the ground when we expanded the areas where we could do the show. I went over to take a look at the new area, and over there's the foundations of what were pens for livestock.
Mm-hmm.
So old concrete foundations on the top of a hill. And I saw that, and I thought, I could cantilever something out over the hill and coming down.
Mm-hmm.
So the site also, was an impact.
Yeah.
And the final thing I'd say is that my drawing, it was all one color and wood. But my background is as a painter, and I have never been known to resist the opportunity to use color when I could. So I dyed the rope that I'm working with, and I dyed many different colors. And then I really ended up just bringing a bunch of materials to the site because I couldn't set up a way in which I could kind of prototype it. I work in a studio, and my studio is my backyard, and I run a kind of a zip line with pulleys, so I can suspend things, but I couldn't really simulate this.
Yeah.
I didn't have a hill, so it just took shape there. But I'm happy with it. I feel like it is its own self, and it has a presence, right? It's somehow more than the sum of its parts.
Well, and it is vibrant. It's beautifully colorful, and it feels, as I looked at it, it feels like it might move. So it does have this organic feel, which kind of makes sense now as you describe, Bert, your process, so that nature is your collaborator. Both the topography, the terrain, and also the source of many of your materials. So. We're running out of time for today, Bert, but were there any other sculptures that you wanted to highlight before we wrap up for the day?
I think which ones I've got pictures of that I haven't already talked about.
Well, I could just go through the list. Sander, you, Marcel, Winnick, we did Gretchen, Carolina, Libby. I think we might have.
Well, I'm still happy to talk about one or two more. We did talk a little bit about Joe Fix.
Yes.
And his piece is very minimal and beautiful. And I'm not actually going to describe it. I'm going to set this as a challenge to go see the show.
Okay. Fair enough.
And although I will also say that there is we do have a website, and we do have beautiful catalogs, but we also have a phone app that sort of shows everything. But it's about rhythm and sort of beautiful in a very simple way. In some ways, it couldn't be more opposite of my own. Nina Tanis, one of our founders, has a piece. She got all of her materials from dumpsters of houses that are being renovated. And the subject of her piece is kind of the process that's happening quite a bit in Newburyport, where the insides of an old house are completely taken out.
Yes. Yeah.
And she's kind of asking questions about whether that's a good idea and what's being lost. And so her piece, the materials that she's chosen, relate to what she's created, that then sort of talks about that. That's over. That her piece is also over in the new area where we are, over by the music center.
Yeah. Well, Bert, thank you so much for taking time to visit us. I love talking to you about this. I've learned a lot about how the show was put together to begin with, how it operates, and what some of the how it serves as really a creativity incubator, and how people are included. There's some wonderful stories attached to the show, and how the artists from the age of 10 on
Right.
find the artist within, even if they didn't start out thinking of themselves as artists, which is a beautiful thing,
Right.
I think. And it is underway right now, so you can go there up until September 29th. The sculptures will be on display,
Yep.
and the website is maudsley.org, if I
Yep.
remember correctly.
Yep.
Anyway, thank you so much, Bert.
Yeah. So 2 things for me to close with. One is that the show's entirely put on by the artists too, and so I get to sit here and I get to put coordinator by my name, but really there's a whole team of artists that not only build the sculptures but volunteer their time to make it happen, and we also get supported by all of the local cultural councils in the area.
Wonderful.
Which we're very grateful for. And if you're really interested in the history of the show, a few years ago, Joyce Zarens, one of the artists, wrote and created a beautiful book about the first 20 years of the show, which can be found at Jabberwocky and Amazon.
Wonderful.
There have been over 800 sculptures built for the show.
Bert, that's impressive.
Yeah, and there's a lot of beautiful photographs in that
I'll
book.
bet.
Yeah.
Yes. All right. Well, that's
Well,
wonderful.
thank you, Mary. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, and I'm glad you added those things. I'm sure people will be interested in checking that out. So, everybody, thank you very much. Bert, thank you, people, for watching. That's all we have time for today. Please join us again Thursday at 9 for the morning show. And until then, everybody, be well. Farewell for now.